Good morning. We've got an absolutely phenomenal episode ahead of us. We've got Dan Perrone here with Perrone Law. Dan is probably at the forefront of some of the newest military litigation in the country involving service member misdiagnosis and VA medical malpractice. I know that we're not here to rip on the VA or anybody in the federal government, so please don't censor us. We're just here to spread the word about a couple of federal laws and what to do if you find yourself in an unfortunate situation where misdiagnosis or medical malpractice occurs. Without further ado, my friend Dan Perrone. Dan, how are you?
Hey, Chris, I'm doing well. It's great to be here.
Thank you for coming on the show. One of the first times that I had ever heard Dan Perrone's name was as the listeners know, I've gotten into different military areas and military benefits. And I came across Dan's name because there was a $3 million case for a military veteran up in Vermont named Wesley Black in a medical misdiagnosis case. And I remember reaching out to Dan, and I was fascinated because I'd never heard of a misdiagnosis case against the VA. And it was a case out of, was it St. Johnsbury VA Hospital? Is that where Wes's case was out of?
It was the White River Junction VA Medical Center.
And my grandparents, my dad was raised on a turkey farm up in Hardwick, Vermont, which is really close to, I remember as a kid getting off the exit, it's about 30 miles from there, practically in Canada, if you haven't been up there. But Dan, tell me about Wes's case a little bit and sort of how you identified it and worked it up.
Sure. So like you said, we represented a veteran of the Vermont Army National Guard named Wesley Black. And he had served in Iraq and Afghanistan. And during his period of service, he was exposed day in, day out, week in, week out for months to burn pits. So when he returned home from his last deployment in 2010, he noticed that there were certain changes happening with his bowel movements. He noticed that he was having chronic diarrhea. He started to develop blood in his stool. And all of that really drove him to seek medical treatment at the White River Junction VA Medical Center. So he went in for the first time in July of 2013 and relayed all of those symptoms to his primary care physician, who happened to be a resident who was working at the VA through a residency program that they had. Now, we came to learn later on that this resident had never even heard of a burn pit until our lawsuit was later filed in 2020, I believe it was. So there was really a huge disconnect between what he had been exposed to and the specialty that his doctor had. So he went in and complained about the GI symptoms he had been experiencing, and they really just dismissed all of it and said, you just have irritable bowel syndrome, IBS. So that goes on for a period of years. He goes in 2014, 2015, and it's the same story. Don't worry about it. You have IBS. No one ever tells him he should have a colonoscopy. No one ever tells him that there's any need for any real further up follow-up testing to get to the root cause of what's happening. So in 2016, he goes back to the VA for his routine physical, and they do some lab work that comes back abnormal. And it might not surprise you now after hearing kind of the background they just gave. No one ever calls him to tell him he had abnormal lab test. So we came to learn through expert consultations that that was an indicating sign that he had cancer that was spreading to his liver at the time. So it's not until 2017 that he goes back to the VA. He gets rushed in through an emergency room visit because he had really an excessive amount of blood in his stool while he was at work as a firefighter. And that is finally when someone said, hey, something is going on here. This guy has had abnormal GI symptoms going back to 2013. It's been 4 years and there's been no colonoscopy. There's been abnormal lab results that have never been followed up on. We need to do a colonoscopy and see what's going on here. So after the colonoscopy is done in February of 2017, he's told that he has stage 4 colon cancer, and at that point it's terminal. It had already metastasized to his liver, and all they can do is try to prolong his life expectancy. but there was no curative treatment available. So at the time he's diagnosed, I mean, he's in the middle of a couple of life developments. He had just had his son was due to be born in about a month.
And Wes is a young guy, right, Dan? I mean, this is
Yeah, he
fresh
was
out of the military.
yeah, he was around 30 or 31 in 2013 when he first went into the VA. And I believe at the time of his diagnosis, he's around my age, 34, 35 years old. So he had just been married for about a year. They had just purchased a house. He had a son that was due to be born within the next month or two. And he's told, hey, you have stage 4 colon cancer. There's nothing we can do for you other than try to prolong your life. So at the time, he's not really thinking, oh my God, they've missed a diagnosis here. They should have connected all of this and treated me sooner.
Right.
He's trying to deal with the fallout of this diagnosis. And it's a couple of years later that he comes to us, and it's actually after another doctor at the VA encouraged him to seek legal advice about what had happened, that he consults an attorney, and he comes to us and it says, I'm not sure if there's anything that can be done here, but will you take a look at my medical records? So we took a look at him, and we knew that it was an uphill battle because he had gone more than the 2-year period that you had to put the government on notice of his claim. And whenever you're dealing with the United States government and bringing a medical malpractice claim, which is typically difficult in its own right, it's always a little bit of an uphill battle. But we felt pretty strongly about his case. He was a very compelling client, and the treatment that he received was just unacceptable. So what we had done is consulted with a number of different experts. We had an internal medicine doctor, we had a physician's assistant, a nurse practitioner. We had one of the leading oncologists in the country that specializes in this type of cancer. And they reviewed his records, and they gave us favorable opinions that this was a case that we should pursue. So that's why we decided to get involved.
And just so I want our listeners to be extremely clear, the level of risk that Dan and his firm takes in investigating these, they are actually paying for these experts to review these cases before they ever file a lawsuit or do anything. So even sometimes when Dan and his team will invest money into a case and hire an expert, right? That expert, I think you told me, was from Mass Gen. That expert, if they don't agree with you, they're going to tell you. And, Dan puts his own money at risk pre-suit to make sure that military families are protected. So I want to explain that these are not like slam dunk shooting fish in a barrel type cases. I mean, there's a lot of pre-suit workup. There's a lot of money involved. There's a lot on the line, and there's a lot for the military family on the line as well.
Yeah, that's right, Chris. Everything that we do is on a contingency fee basis. And all of these claims, I should let your listeners know, are brought pursuant to what's called the Federal Tort Claims Act, which allows us to sue the federal government to seek compensation for individuals like Wes Black, who have suffered personal injury, death, or other types of damages due to the negligence of a federal employee, which obviously includes most of the physicians and nurses and other personnel at a VA medical center.
Right.
So since we're pursuing this on a contingency fee basis, that means we are going to fund the case entirely ourselves. We're going to put up all of the money that's necessary to seek expert consultations, to get expert reports, conduct depositions, and do whatever else is necessary to hopefully obtain a successful recovery. And there's no out-of-pocket payment by the client to us at any point until there is a successful recovery. We only get paid when our client gets paid. And in Wes's case, we had very significant expenses over 6 figures before we knew whether or not there was going to be any recovery. So we do take tremendous risk, and that's why we're very careful about screening these cases before we get too far involved, because it doesn't benefit us or our client to go down a rabbit hole and ultimately have a case that can't be supported by medical evidence. And just in particular on Wes's case, some states like Vermont have legal requirements that have to be followed, where you have to submit as the attorney an affidavit or a declaration verifying the fact that you have consulted with the appropriate medical experts and they have given you a favorable opinion that it is likely that there was malpractice that had occurred. So you have to make sure you are very in tune with the particular jurisdiction within which you're practicing, and make sure that you meet all of the legal requirements, which a lot of times does require an expert to be involved before a lawsuit is filed.
And Dan, just going back to when and again, this isn't letting the VA medical provider off the hook, but back in 2013, 2014, I mean, there was a lot of information going around about how burn pits are not good. And what we know now, right? 2022, honoring our PACT Act, we've got all of this information now about 3.5 million service members may be affected. I mean, what did you know about burn pits, or what did Wes shared with you about burn pits at the beginning of his case? I mean, truly, Wes Black's case, the first burn pit case that I remember hearing about. What did you know about burn pits back then, and how did you tie the two together?
Well, when we first met with Wes and he told us about these burn pits, it was the first time I had ever heard of them. It wasn't something I was familiar with beforehand. And I think most of the doctors that had treated him were unfamiliar with them as well.
And what is it, just for the listeners, Dan?
Sure. So it's basically a very large open field where all of the waste produced by a military base is dumped, coated in jet fuel and other accelerants, and then lit on fire. And it burns 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Okay.
It's basically the military version of a garbage dump. But the only way they can dispose of it is to light it on fire.
And that also goes for the service members downrange, like if they're in a place maybe they haven't said where they are or don't want anyone to find them, would that also be a burn pit?
So most of the burn pits are located pretty close to where the military bases were located, because it has to be somewhat convenient to take the garbage and waste disposal from that base and dispose of it. So a lot of the military members that served on these bases, they would experience it while they were in their quarters, while they were eating food. It was something that was really all around them while they were actually stationed on the base. If they were out in the field, they might not be necessarily exposed to the burn pit, but certainly when they are on base, if they're standing guard at the gate, if they're eating dinner, if they're sleeping, it was all around them all day, every day.
You're saying all of this, and I'm thinking that some of the listeners are like, Chris, shut your mouth. We all know what burn pits are. For civilians like me, when I read about it, I needed to read like what was going into them, what are they doing, and just I'm asking this for our listeners that maybe are unfamiliar, like maybe it's a military spouse that wants more information, maybe it's a civilian, but so basically what you're saying, Dan, is if you're living on base and you breathe oxygen, you're exposed to a burn pit, right?
Well, most likely you are, yes.
Okay. And from there, what really tie that into how you discovered that burn pits have negative health effects, if you could.
Sure. So the first indication that we had seen of the connection was from a medical doctor at the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute up in Massachusetts. And he had given an opinion to support Wes's disability claim that his cancer was more likely than not caused by his exposure to burn pits.
Okay.
So that was the first indication we had that there was a connection between Wes's particular cancer and his burn pit exposure.
And when you say that claim, are you talking about like a VA disability claim?
Yes, exactly. He had filed a disability claim and it was initially denied. And then he sought this independent medical opinion from this oncologist at Dana-Farber, who gave him the opinion that he needed to qualify for disability benefits. So he connected the colon cancer diagnosis to his service in Iraq and Afghanistan, where he was exposed to burn pits.
Got it. Okay. And then tell us a little bit more about the litigation. So you had 10 experts?
I believe we had a total of 8 experts. We had an internal medicine doctor, we had a nurse practitioner, a physician assistant, an oncologist, a life expectancy expert, an economist, and there is one other one. We had also an environmental health expert who is a former veteran himself, who gave us the opinion that really formed part of the basis for one of our claims, which was that his exposure to burn pits increased his risk of cancer, and it was an environmental factor that should have been taken into consideration by his doctors when he went to them in 2013 and 2014 and complained about all of these GI symptoms. So essentially, what he was saying is that if you look at these symptoms standing alone in a otherwise healthy 30 or 31-year-old, you might not jump right to colon cancer. But when you view it in the context of someone who has been exposed to burn pits and has really inhaled this smoke and ingested it on his food for days and weeks and months, that raises the level of concern to a whole nother level where there is an increased risk of cancer that requires further diagnostic testing. You can't just jump to a diagnosis of IBS and call it a day. You have to do something more. You have to do something further. And that's really what got us to looking into what the VA and the government in general knew about the harmful effects of burn pit exposure back in that 2013 and prior time period, right? Because we're dealing with a military veteran who went to a VA medical center in 2013. So we have to look to see what they knew at that time. So one of the things that we came across was a training letter that was sent to all of the VA medical centers. And within that letter, they listed out the different toxins that are emitted from burn pits. A lot of them had overlap with Agent Orange, which I'm sure a lot of your listeners are very familiar with.
Oh, yeah.
So we started looking at that, and it turns out that a lot of the toxins emitted from burn pits have adverse effects on the GI tract. Obviously, that is important for us because we were dealing with the diagnosis of colon cancer.
Right.
Then we started looking more into some of the VA handbooks that were available to see if there was anything relating to the type of investigation and evaluation that should be done of a military member experiencing GI symptoms following an exposure to air pollutants like burn pit smoke. And we came across a June of 2007 VA handbook portion that really dealt with the Gulf War registry, but it also included Operation Iraqi Freedom, and it included areas where Wes had served, in particular Iraq. And within that handbook, it basically said anyone who's exposed to air pollutants in these designated areas needs to have a certain minimum workup performed when they report to a VA medical center for care.
Colonoscopy.
So exactly.
That right? I mean, I don't know. I'm just
so you hit the nail on the head.
Okay.
So the way it was, I think, designed to work is that if you are experiencing these symptoms that are otherwise unexplained, and you go in and you have a certain baseline test performed, like a CBC, a complete blood count, and that turns up normal, then you have to move on to what they called phase 2 testing, which required additional workup. And then as part of that phase 2 testing, if you exhibited different symptoms like diarrhea, it gave a list of different diagnostic testing that had to be performed. So in this particular situation with complaints of diarrhea and abdominal discomfort, 2 of the things that were required were a GI consult and a colonoscopy with biopsies.
Okay.
And that's the exact type of follow-up medical treatment our experts were saying were required. And if it had been performed, the cancer would have been caught sooner and it would have led to a more favorable outcome.
Now, is the and that all makes complete sense. Is the reason why the colonoscopy wasn't being performed because of the age of the service member? Like why was it the cost? Like, why wasn't it being done if that's kind of the common standard of care?
So the only thing that I can tell you is what we learned through depositions from deposing the doctor that had initially done the 2013 and 2014 examinations. And basically what she had said is that she didn't feel that it was necessary when you had a patient that presented with diarrhea, and she dismissed the bleeding because she found anal irritation, which she felt was the cause of the blood that he was seeing in his stool. Obviously, we know that there can be more than one cause of blood. So even if there is anal irritation, that doesn't exclude the possibility that there could be bleeding coming from somewhere else within the GI tract.
Right.
So we felt that it was negligence on her part not to at least advise him that there could be bleeding from somewhere else, that his symptoms could be caused by something other than IBS, such as colon cancer, and then really give him all the information he needed to determine whether or not a colonoscopy should be performed.
Okay. And do you think that now that we know what we know about burn pits and those types of air pollutants, the standard maybe isn't, hey, when you turn 50, go get your colonoscopy? It needs to be more of a individual basis. Like, hey, if you're a young person, but you served in Iraq or Afghanistan, boots on the ground, you need to be very cautious of this. You need to take it seriously, get a annual colonoscopy. Like what do you think the best preventative step would be so that it doesn't end at one of those terminal stages?
Well, I actually think that the program that they had outlined in their handbook was probably a good starting place. So, like I said, the way it was designed to work is if I am a veteran who presents to a VA medical center after having served in a place where burn pits were known to exist,
Right.
then I need to be examined in a way that accounts for that exposure, right? So you can have the initial type of screening testing done, the complete blood count, the kind of routine physical exam. But then you need to go beyond that if there are symptoms that are not immediately and conclusively explained. And like they had outlined, they had an entire list of different symptoms that they had attributed to these air pollutants that were prevalent in these designated areas. And then they had specific symptom exams that needed to be performed. So if you had abdominal discomfort, you needed to have a GI consult, you need to have a colonoscopy, you needed to have further testing beyond what is otherwise routine at a physical exam to determine what is actually the cause of the symptoms with which you're presenting. And I think that that was a good idea. I think that was a very good starting point. And obviously the knowledge that we have now in 2022 is much greater than what was had in 2007. So I think there's improvements that can be made from it. I think there needs to be more screening that is done to prevent cancer from getting to the point where it is terminal or can only be treated with a much more invasive type of procedure. But at least as a starting point, there needs to be a different way that these veterans are evaluated based on their particular environmental exposures.
Agreed. And I think that's one of the things that we always try to preach on this show is that we as a society spend, and rightfully so, a lot on protecting us, right? Protecting our society, protecting our lifestyle, protecting our country, right? We've got all these men and women that are putting their lives at risk to protect us. But I think that as a country, the only way that we fully complete the job is if once those servicemen and women return home, we care for them, right? Like we don't just discard them, but we make sure that they get the medical they need, they get the benefits they need, because they did sacrifice more than, I mean, I'm a civilian, I never served, they sacrificed more than me, and I think that they're entitled to it. And I don't mind my tax dollars going to, I think it's a good cause. So
I completely agree with you, Chris. I mean, if you think about it, we don't just let people who enroll in the military go and serve overseas without putting them through a boot camp, some type of training so they can learn the basics that they need to perform their jobs. Why should it be different for the healthcare providers that are taking care of them when they return home? There should be some type of additional training because they're treating a very unique portion of the population that has environmental and occupational hazards that they're exposed to on a regular basis that is different than what you and I are exposed to. So there really needs to be an additional level of training on the medical side of this. It's not just preparing military members to go off to war to defend the country. It has to be reciprocated when they return home. There has to be some type of training that is provided to their physicians so that they are well versed and well aware of all of the unique hazards that they're exposed to so they can properly evaluate any symptoms that they have.
Exactly. And Dan, we're going to talk about farming on the other side of the break, right? Of all things people listen to on this show, we try to always keep it something that military families or consumers can use, right? And information that they can take and more so, get to sleep at night. Like, hey, if your life insurance gets denied and you submit a death certificate and a beneficiary claim form and you aren't paid in 30 days, red flag, call a lawyer, right? Like things like that. Just to know, like stop, drop, and roll, So on the other side of the break, I know we've got listeners all over the country, military families and consumers that reach out to me and talk to me about different things. I want to hit more of the rural pockets of America, our military that are in the farming community. Dan is also, again, not surprising, at the forefront of some of the farming litigation that's going on for some of the companies that have allegedly done some things that have harmed consumers. I don't know what the settlement agreements say, so I'm not going to disparage anybody, but we're going to talk about that on the other side of the break, how Dan is helping those farmers recoup and recover, and also what you can do to protect your military family that's farming. So if you could, Dan, before we hit the break, just tell everybody, if they want to contact you, where do they find your website? What's a good way to contact you? I mean, obviously they can contact me too, but just if you could.
Sure. So the firm name is Perrone Law PPLC, and our website is www.theperronefirm.com. And we could also be reached by phone, and I think this is a pretty apt phone number for the conversation we just had. It's 1-833-BURN-PIT. So we can be reached by phone at that number as well.
And any social media?
We do, but
it's okay. Sure. I didn't mean to put you on the spot. But Dan, and just so the listeners know too, Dan's firm is up in Dan's license in New York and New Jersey. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
But he takes cases all over the country. So it doesn't matter where you are. I mean, obviously, if he's not licensed there, he'll link up with local counsel or co-counsel the case. So don't be hesitant. I mean, he's been all over the country with these cases. Great attorney. So on the other side of the break, we're going to talk about farming. So looking forward to it. And I know we've got our podcast here, so we'll just keep going and go with that. The split is more meant for the radio show. Hopefully that's where Casey will make the edits nice. So we're still live, Dan. Tell us about, I want to give a little teaser to the folks that rewatch this on YouTube and Facebook. So tell us what types of farming cases you handle, and then at the end I want you to tell the listeners and viewers how much you recovered for our farming community.
Sure. So we handle a number of different farming type cases. We've handled personal injury claims on behalf of farmers who were injured on the job. We had one particular case where a farmer was delivering a hay bale, and the farm to which he was delivering it unloaded it inappropriately. The hay bale actually fell and crushed the farmer that was delivering it and killed him. So that's one type of personal injury claim that we have handled. Wow. We've handled claims against manure draglining companies who have performed their operations inappropriately and as a result have injured workers on the farm. And we've also handled a series of class action cases against manufacturers of robotic milking equipment. To give you an example of what that is, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's basically a robot that is designed to automate the process of milking a cow.
Okay.
So those are some of the types of cases we've handled. Pretty much anything that relates to farming is something we'd be willing to look at, investigate, and potentially get involved with.
So the backbone of America, farmers, right? We don't ever think about it. We go to the grocery store, we get a dozen eggs or we get a pound of bacon or whatnot, and nobody ever thinks about it. But there are so many different types of equipment and things that they work with. And one of the things that Dan has been able to do is help farmers where they weren't getting the, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Dan, they weren't getting the output from the equipment that they were, that they had purchased. What they thought that this milking equipment would do is they set it and forget it so that the farmer didn't need to work around the clock, and that this would essentially help as a second set of hands. But if anything, it maybe just caused more headaches. Is that a fair way to introduce that claim?
Yeah, that's a pretty good description. So the kind of target demographic that purchased these robotic milking systems were smaller family-run farms, and in particular ones where there was the younger generation who was coming into the business. A lot of these farms are passed down generation to generation. And obviously, Chris, I mean, you and I know our generation, and certainly those younger than us, are very technology focused. And if there's a way to automate what they're doing, they want to try to do it.
So true.
And that's exactly what this robotic milking equipment was designed to do. It was meant to automate the milking process so that you didn't have to be in the barn 2 or 3 times a day milking cows 7 days a week, 365 days a year. They can't take a vacation. They can't take holidays off. They have to be in there milking the cows every single day. So this equipment was meant to give them a more flexible lifestyle, meant to make their life a little bit easier so that they could have more freedom to go to their kids' football games, soccer games, spend time at home, be at home for a family dinner. It was
And they're
meant
not cheap, right, Dan? I mean,
no, I
really
mean,
expensive.
they cost over 6 figures, a lot of them 150,000 or more to purchase just one robot unit. So it's very expensive equipment. And then when they got into using the equipment, it did not perform in the way that they had expected it to. And when you're talking about a small family farm investing hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars, it really has a horrific financial impact on that farm, not only for them, but for the next generation. Will there be a farm to pass? Will there be a farm to even pass down to your kids, to your grandkids?
Sure.
So there really was a tremendous impact that a lot of our clients felt, and that's why we decided to get involved with it. This was a very risky case at the outset. We had to put a lot of time and resources into developing it. But because of the community it affected and because of how it impacted them, this was something we felt very strongly about. So we decided to make the investment and get involved on behalf of these farmers.
And just like we talked about earlier when we were saying, Dan and I, obviously we have different firms. We work together on some stuff, but we take cases all over. We have local counsel. Dan, where are these farming cases originating from? I mean, they're not in New York and New Jersey, even though we know you're in the Garden State, right? Where are these farmers located? Where have you brought these lawsuits?
So funny enough, we actually did bring one in New York, but it was not in the New York City area. But they are primarily located in the Midwest. We did have one in Vermont. We had one on file in Missouri, and then we have several on file in Minnesota.
Okay. And the one that you're talking about that's sort of reached a conclusion. I know you have some ongoing ones, and I don't want to talk about that because obviously that's private, but the one that you have that is has fully wrapped up, what was the if you can talk about it, what were the final terms of that, and where was that case out of?
Sure. So the case that we did resolve was out of Missouri. It was a class action that was brought on behalf of a nationwide class of farmers who had purchased robotic milking equipment from one particular manufacturer. And we were able to reach a settlement of $55 million on behalf of the affected farmers. And then there was a fairly complicated formula for how it was distributed that I won't get into, but the cash value of the settlement was $55 million.
So not the jelly of the month club that the class action haters talk about, how nobody gets anything, right? Isn't that the best? I talk about class action on here, and I got a lot of people that understand that there are legitimate class actions out there. that are for the people, and that the attorneys get paid for their time. Usually it's even separate or maybe a part of the class, but $55 million to farmers, that is literally incredible. What else can you tell us about that? I just had to put that out there, because what you're doing for military families and farmers is incredible. That amount of money is life-changing to give back to the farming community, where really, I mean, what were they left with before Perrone Law came in? Yeah, sorry, your farm messed up, you don't know how to use the equipment, blame the farmer, right? I mean, is that?
Yeah, I mean, we had farmers who recovered 6 and 7 figures as a result of the settlement, which uh, we felt was a really great result by bringing this as a class action. Everyone hears about the coupon settlements. Everyone hears about the cases that resolve, and maybe you get 2 cents deposited into your TD bank account if something had gone wrong, right?
Right.
But this was a case where we were able to get really meaningful relief for each of our class members and the clients that we represented. And this was a case, as much as I'd love to take all the credit for it, that it was really a collaborative effort. I had co-counsel on the case from New Hampshire and a very, very good firm from Missouri that we partnered up with. So it was a collaborative effort between our firms, and it really couldn't have been done without all of us coming together with our clients who stepped up to be class representatives to get the result that we did.
That is so important, Dan, and I cannot stress that enough to our listeners. You got to have somebody that's willing to fight. You got to have somebody that's willing to take these companies to the mat when they do wrong things, because, we'll screen a big case or a class action or something like that. And I understand why, right? Nobody wants that to have their name in the news, or that, sort of adversarial kind of thing in their life. But I think it's so important, because if people don't stand up and fight against some of these bad actors and bullies, they're just going to keep taking advantage of people. And I say that in a broad sense. I'm not targeting any company in your litigation or anything like that. But I do just think that having that class representative, that person that's willing to carry the torch and borrow that power of the class to help everyone, even if it means they're not going to get, they're not going to become a gajillionaire off it, but they're going to do good for everybody else that was affected. I think it's really important. And we're going to have Tom on an episode. Maybe we'll do one with the 3 of us, but Tom, we'll get his name in the mix a little bit too. So Dan, you work with Tom as well, right? An attorney at Perrone or associated with Perrone.
Yeah, so a good friend of mine, Tom, he started doing some work with me, and he's going to be involved with some stuff that Chris and I are doing, which we'll have to have an episode dedicated to that, talk about some Camp Lejeune stuff. But yeah, Tom's a great guy. He's an attorney that I've worked with for years, and he's been a big part of what we're doing. So we've been kind of blessed with really fortunate relationships that my firm has had with our co-counsel on all the cases that we've had. And Chris is a great attorney. We're partnering up with him to pursue some cases on behalf of the veteran communities, so and their families as well. So it's really important finding a group of attorneys that will come together and represent your interest, right? I mean, sometimes you have to be able to say, this isn't a case that I'm going to go out alone, no matter how much it might benefit your financial interest to be the only attorney in the case. If you can find a situation where there are very competent attorneys that are willing to partner up to kind of fill whatever gaps they may have, that really provides a meaningful service to the client, and ultimately they're the ones that you're trying to get a reward for.
And we talked about this on a previous episode with Tom, but similar thing, Dan, to what you said. Like, sometimes for attorneys, it is difficult. You want to be the only guy that's taking on Goliath, but sometimes, having a few extra attorneys and firms collaborating and working together is actually more beneficial, not only for the client, but for the case, right? Because the client has more people they can lean on. There are more people with different areas of the law that they kind of know. So I agree with you. I think, and importantly, knowing the area of the law that you practice, right? Like this is what we do. We represent military families. We did before Camp Lejeune. We will after Camp Lejeune. So it is important.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Especially when it really comes to bringing claims on behalf of military members. There are very unique rules that apply to bringing those claims. I'm sure you're very well aware of it on the disability side and on the tort side. There are very specific rules that have to be followed in order to bring a claim. And if you don't bring it properly, then your claim can be forever dismissed and you won't be able to seek any compensation. So it's really important in finding an attorney that specializes and focuses in on the type of claim that you want to bring. If you're a military member and you want to bring a claim against the federal government because of medical malpractice, for example, you want to find an attorney that handles those types of cases. Just to give you a sense, Chris, as a prerequisite for bringing that type of a case, you first have to present it to the Department of Veteran Affairs. It's called exhausting your administrative remedies.
Right.
And it's a very simple thing to do. There's a form that has to be filled out. You have to provide certain medical records. But if you don't do that, and then you try to file a lawsuit, your claim will be dismissed, and then you might not be able to bring a claim at any point in the future. So it's doing the little things like that and having an attorney that is really aware of how these claims have to be handled that makes all the difference.
And I think, that's the reason why it's so important to find, for military misdiagnosis and for, I guess we can put SGLI and VGLI in there, right? Because TSGLI is sort of administrative as well, but VA disability is obviously administrative, Camp Lejeune, but those components where, hey, look, you may not win even if you get to trial, but you got to make sure you do everything right to even get there. And if you don't submit the right form, if you don't submit it to the right place, if you don't file it in a timely manner, you could get time barred. It's like losing the race before it even starts.
Exactly. And I mean, you could be the best criminal defense attorney in the world, but you might not have any experience in bringing a federal tort claims act on behalf of a military veteran. So expertise in one area, being a very well-respected, well-regarded attorney in one area, doesn't make you competent in every area of law. And then that's something that I think a lot of clients in particular maybe don't appreciate when they are searching for an attorney.
Right.
They see the commercials on the news, they see these big firm names, they see the ones that have the fancy jingles that are easy to remember. But that doesn't mean that they are going to be an expert or a specialist in the type of law that you need them to be to bring your claim. So it's really important in doing your research on the firm that you're looking to retain. And it doesn't hurt to speak to more than one attorney. It's always a good idea to speak to at least one or two other attorneys than the one you're thinking about hiring and vet them out a little bit. Ask them questions. What type of cases have you handled against this particular entity or governmental agency before? What results have you had? I mean, sometimes they're confidential, but any claims against the United States of America cannot be confidential. So if you're a military member and you want to find out if your attorney has handled successfully any claims against the US government, you can ask them and they can tell you there's nothing confidential about the claims that they have handled against the government. So you really want to do your research, ask those pointed questions that might be uncomfortable to ask. Find out if the attorney has a favorable track record. And if not, maybe keep doing some research till you find one that is.
All sound advice. I think you hit the nail on the head. I tell my clients this too, particularly sometimes when they try to, I tell them I'm always super transparent with my fee. Like there's no reason to hide the ball. I don't think that does anyone any favors. But in a situation where someone says like, "Hey, can you do it for this?" I always just kind of resort back to that. Well, please call another attorney, or you should if you want to call someone, like I don't shy away from that because number one, if they can get an attorney on the phone, that's different from you. And I mean, they can get you and I all the time, right? I mean, they
Right.
do. Our clients get access to us. That's what kind of makes our firms a little bit different than maybe some of the ones that you're referring to. But the other part of that is ask them exactly the questions that Dan said. Do you take these cases? Is this something that, your advertising is pumping out and you're getting in and you're trying to triage? I mean, what types of cases do you take? And, again, you go with who you feel comfortable with. If you like a certain attorney better, I think, you're going to be more comfortable going into a relationship where both people want to work together than somebody being like, well, I guess,
Right. I mean, the
So,
nature of our relationships with our clients is kind of unique in that it spans a number of years most of the time. So you need to have that level of comfort and confidence both ways, in order for it to be a successful working relationship. And Chris, you were totally right on the fee front. I mean, obviously, in the Federal Tort Claims Act cases we do handle, there's a fee cap of 25% if a lawsuit's filed. And if we're able to get a settlement through the administrative process, the fee is capped at 20%, which, relatively speaking, is a modest contingency fee to begin with.
right.
And sometimes if a lawyer is willing to do it for less than that, there's a reason why. And it's not always a good reason. I mean, I just learned the lesson with the sprinkler system I had put in my house by a guy who said he could do it. He was a jack of all trades, but like the saying goes, he was a master of none. So it would have been worth paying a little bit more and getting it done properly. So the same applies in the legal field as well. There's a reason that your attorney charges the fee that he does, as long as it's within the bounds of the law. So keep that in mind when searching for an attorney.
I agree. It's kind of like, and I don't know if we've just said it enough times on here or if I got it from somewhere else. So if you're the attorney that came out with this reference, just reach out to me and I'll give you credit every time I say it. But it is a legitimate reference, and you can buy a lot of different things when you go to Walmart, right? Like imagine you're walking down the pasta aisle. You can get great value pasta sauce, or you can get, well, I don't even know what a premium pasta sauce is. I'm not sure. But
Imported from Italy.
yeah, they're San Marzano tomatoes. I don't know. But that's a little bit different than when your legal claims on the line, or when a loved one has passed away, or when you've had a catastrophic injury, right? The great value decision may be a good decision in many areas of your life, but 100% of nothing is still nothing. So just be aware of that, folks. And sometimes it does pay to pay a premium because you just have somebody that can get you more, and that's my own opinion. That's not even legal advice. That's just my own general opinion. Because I think there are things in my life that I would buy the great value pasta sauce, or I would buy the premium. And I think, a little bit of experience will kind of shift you in those directions, but I can promise you law is probably not something where you want to go with the cheapest, let's just say.
Yeah, Chris, I totally agree with you. I think we've kind of hit the nail on the head with this whole discussion. And
Definitely.
one other thing I think maybe we should let some of the listeners know is that if you do have an attorney and you have a little bit of buyer's remorse, it's never too late to seek a second opinion, to switch attorneys. You are not confined or bound to the attorney that you initially hired. So you can always seek a second opinion. I've taken cases over from attorneys when their clients became dissatisfied. So that is an option that is available if you do become dissatisfied with the attorney that you do have.
It's so true. I had 2 cases that I had really good 6-figure results this year. The firms that I got them from referred them over. I don't think that there was necessarily any client dissatisfaction, but maybe it was just something that they was maybe outside their wheelhouse or they didn't want to take. And I love it because, you know, I can help someone out. The attorneys are going to co-counsel it with me. The clients are great. It's just knowing what you said, Dan. If you're in it, you can try to get out of it, and you just have to know what it is that you need as a client. Do you need that attorney to pitch you on the front end, or do you need them to get you what you actually deserve and you're probably entitled to? So
right.
Yeah, I think we've got it covered. And I love how you slipped in second opinion there, because that's usually my line in this episode. So Dan's taking over my job. Not good. I'll be walking out of here with a box. But before we go, we're gonna have hopefully Dan and Tom on for another episode. We can cover some more stuff. But Dan, one more time for anybody that's just tuning in now on the back half of the show, can you tell us your contact information again?
Absolutely. So the website is www.theperronefirm.com, and it's spelled Perrone. There's a email address on there. It's info@theperronefirm.com, and our phone number is 833-BURN-PIT.
Okay, perfect. Very, very recognizable, easy to remember. And if you need anything from me, folks, as always, brochulaw.com. If you have a legal inquiry, medical, a military benefits question, a legal question, case@brochulaw.com, case@brochulaw.com. Telephone number 904-201-1771, or my new social media handles. My social media guru is trying to help me rebrand. So The Legal Bro. Dan, what do you think? Is that catchy enough?
I like it. That's good. I might have to get some advice from you on the social media front. I think you're way ahead of me on it.
Just amateur hour over here, but I kind of like it. My friends from high school and college, some of my buddies call me bro. They're just, I guess, too lazy to add the shoe. So The Legal Bro, check it out. YouTube, Facebook, subscribe. And if you have a question or something that you want us to talk about, please send it to us. We want to talk about it. And we're going to be talking about all sorts of things, current events, and particularly military related. So maybe we can get Dan on the show again, hopefully him and Tom. But either way, pleasure having you today, Dan. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to our military listeners.
Oh, my pleasure, Chris. Thanks for having me. It was a blast.
Absolutely. Thank you.